Hello everybody and welcome to this questions and answers with the educators. I'm Claire, as you know, and with me is Suzanne.
Hi.
And Josh.
Hi.
And thank you very much for the questions that you posted on this step. And thank you also to people who have been reading through and posting some answers and advice. Please, I'd like you to encourage you to do that after you've watched this video as well, because there are many, many more of you than there are of us. We won't get through all the questions now, so please do share your advice and suggestions. We're going to do our best though, aren't we? We'll get through as many as we can. So let's get started. And our first question is from Olga. Olga says, can you share some activities to help my students practice asking questions? Suzanne.
Okay, I think there are lots of great activities that you can do related to asking questions. So an activity that I really like is, who am I? So you think of a famous person that you are, and your learners individually have to ask you questions to try and guess who you are. But they can only ask, you can only say yes or no, so they have to ask yes or no questions. So for example, are you a woman? Are you American? Are you a singer? Etc, etc, etc. So that's really good practice related to things like personal information, jobs, etc. So that's one good thing. You can also do something like, once you've done that, and as a teacher you can put them in groups and get the learners to do it within the group, and you can give them cards with the names of famous people as prompts.
Nice.
And another thing you can do, which is similar, is that you put a learner at the front of the classroom, you give them the name of somebody famous, or you give them a personality that they are, and then other students interview them. And again, that's something that could be done in groups once you've done a demonstration of it. So you could say, okay, you're going to interview, I don't know, Brad Pitt, or somebody that your students know really well.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, obviously the person who takes on the persona of that famous person can just make up any information, so it doesn't have to be true.
Great, I like that. You just reminded me of a game I used to play with students as well, where I think you need to demonstrate it first. So you get the students to ask you questions, and they can ask you any question. They have to try and make you say yes or no. And you have to reply saying anything else, but you're not allowed to say yes or no, or you're out. So they might say, do you like coffee? And you could say, actually, I prefer tea. Or, you know, are you a woman? And you would say, well, I think that's obvious, you know, instead of saying yes or no. And then you can get them doing it in pairs, and students get really into this. It's really fun because they want to catch each other out. So that's my suggestion. Josh, do you have an activity that you like?
Yeah, I have. I don't think my suggestion is as good as either of those, so I shall I'll be using those. I'd forgotten about them, and I'm going to be using both your ideas this week probably. But yeah, for questions, I was just reminded, because I've been starting a lot of courses recently with new students that I don't know, and I thought you were going to steal my idea for a second, because I get them to ask them to ask me questions, any questions they like, to find out something about me first of all. So in order to kind of encourage them to relax and open up about themselves, first of all, I introduce myself and say to them, okay, here's some facts about me on the board. Try to guess what the question is that gives this answer. So I'm sure lots of people have done that lots of times. So I might put, you know, early 50s, very young looking early 50s. And they might say, so the question would be, how old are you, or something. Yes, and I'll have some other facts up there, and then I can use it with lots of levels. So I might put something like Daisy up there, and they say, well, what could Daisy be? And I'd say, speak to your partner, try and guess what the question is. And then they never get the question, because this one is for a very advanced level. The question, can you guess the question? What's the question? The answer is Daisy. It's a question about me.
What's the name of your cat?
Or so usually they'll say things like, what's your cat's name? Any other suggestions? Suze, have you got a suggestion? What's Daisy? What could it be?
What's the name of your daughter?
For example, okay, so they come up with those kinds of things, and then I'll say, well, no, it's not that one either. And then I'll say, okay, I'm going to say the question at natural speed, and I want you to try and catch what the question was and work with your partner to work out what the question was. So actually the question is, what would your name be if you'd been born a girl?
Oh, nice.
So I'm going to do that with high levels, and then they have to try and put that together, and I'll say, well, how many words were there? And they never get the right number of words, and I can count the number of words. And then with high levels we can look at, that is mixed third conditional with a passive in it, very advanced grammar. So it's a good way to kind of get a feel for how much they understand, etc. And then I'll say, okay, now with your partners, think of any question you want at all to ask me to find out more about me. And if I don't like the question, don't worry, I'll just lie in my answer. You can try and guess whether I'm lying or not. So that gives them a kind of fun, well, hopefully a fun, we try and do it in a fun, tongue-in-cheek way to get to know me a bit. And then I say, okay, so what do you know about me? And they can tell me all the things they can remember about me. And then I say, well, what do I know about you? And they say, nothing. And it's right, I know nothing about them. And then we might do concentric circles to ask each other questions. And if it's lower levels, I'll give them structured questions. And if it's higher levels, it can be anything. I'll practice listening and interacting and say, okay, so just say to your partner, so tell me a bit about you, and show interest and smile and nod and, oh, a bit more, I'd like to, and then we can all share the information again. And I put myself in one of the circles as well. So it's a kind of getting to know you activity and helps me understand their levels.
Great. I don't know why you said that wasn't as good as our ideas. I think that's great.
Well, because your ideas are great ideas that you can use all the time, whereas mine is a bit kind of specifically getting to know you and trying to create a good atmosphere in the classroom.
I like that you had a bit of pronunciation in there as well, like looking at connected speech in questions. That's a nice activity, because we've been talking about pronunciation quite a bit this week, haven't we? Let's move on. Let's talk about another question, and this one's from Norma. Norma wants to know, can you give me a hint how to work with songs properly? Who uses songs?
I would love to use songs more. Shall I leap in anyway? Because it was you asked the first one first, so I'll jump in, and then I can say something silly, and you can give better answers after me. Now, I was only going to leap in because I noticed on week 1, people are still contributing to the great lessons, and someone, I can't remember their name, I think Saverius or something, mentioned a lesson that had worked really well, which was looking in depth at the lyrics of a song by an artist that the people he was working with really liked. I think it was Tupac or something, but anyway, it was a song about the artist's mother and the hard times they'd been through, and how he'd learned to respect her for all she'd done, etc. And that had, working in depth with the meaning of the song, had helped his students kind of want to talk more about themselves and what their lives and what they've been through. So I think that can work really well. I think just working with what the lyrics are to a song, people lots of do gap fills and use lyrics training. I like to do things like lyrics videos. So maybe as a project, students will choose a song that they really like, work on understanding what the lyrics are and what they mean, and then take a few lines and draw representations of what it actually means instead of the words, and then they can make a kind of video that is as if it was paper slides with their drawings, with the music playing in the background, and they show the lyrics or their representations of the lyrics. So that's kind of working with the meaning of it. I think you have to be careful with copyright and stuff like that, obviously, so not putting these videos on YouTube, etc., but understanding the lyrics in that sense.
Very
and
creative.
Well, kind of project and personalize and engage with, and let's understand it. And before we go, another one I'd love to mention is the wrong lyrics. The wrong lyrics activities on Hancock McDonald website, where they have kind of misunderstood Beatles song lyrics, which is to work on connected speech and what it sounds like they're saying when in fact they're saying something else. So it's a way into kind of working in more detail on the lyrics. And I had a request. maybe you two can answer this one. There are lots of websites where you can search YouTube or other sources of videos for specific phrases, like kind of audiovisual concordances. But I've never come across an audiovisual concordancer for lyrics. I mean, there are plenty of places where you can search for words within the lyrics and get the text of the lyrics and see them in context. So that could be a way of finding examples of using couldn't have or whatever it is that you want to look for. But I think it would be great if you could type that in and see an endless selection of little bits of lyrics, song videos with the lyrics being sung, which contain the examples of the language you want to practice or have more exposure to. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, because there's Play Phrase Me, isn't there, which you can search.
Play Phrase Me is like that, but for video clips.
Videos, but not songs. So I don't know of a song one. Do you know one, Sue?
No, I don't. I mean, there are some apps where you can watch a video and listen and put the lyrics in, but not exactly what Joshua's talking about there. So I think that's a good project for him.
If anybody watching this knows, please put a link under the video, because we would like to know. You just reminded me, Sue, if you sing or there's a song playing, there's an app, isn't there, that recognises it. What's that one called?
The one that will find the song, yeah.
Yeah.
I think lots of them will now.
We'll have to research that. So you could sing the song, for example, and get your phone to recognise it. That could be a fun thing for students to do. See if they can recognise the lyrics and then search for the song, you know, a bit like using your Google Assistant for that.
Yeah.
That's your area anyway, isn't it, Joshua? Songs, Suzanne, how do you use songs?
Actually, something Josh said about, the wrong lyrics. I actually found a really nice BBC video this week where somebody was talking about, listening to music when you're hungry and hearing food in all the lyrics. And that's funny. And I thought it'd be really nice to do with students. So maybe
hungry students
to share that. And I think, it depends on the age of your learners. I think one good tip with using songs is don't just play them once. Play them many times, but each time have a slightly different activity. And even, the most common one you would get is, for example, a gap fill for the lyrics. But to make that more interesting, you could put students in pairs and have they have different handouts with different lyrics missing. So then after they've listened to the song, they can then check each other's work. And I think then it takes a little bit of pressure away from you. There's so many different things you can do. You can cut lines of the lyrics up and you can get learners to put them in order as they listen. Or you could, with younger learners, it could be pictures. If the lyrics tell a story, they could put the pictures in the order of the song.
Nice.
You could pick out words from the song with younger learners as well, and you could say, okay, when you hear banana, put your hand up. When you hear apple, touch your nose. So you give them all these actions related to the song, so they're listening and doing the actions. I think that's a really nice activity to do. You could do something similar with older learners, but maybe something a little bit less childish. Depends on your learners. Maybe your learners would be quite like something a bit silly. So what it
I've
could
done
be.
that with adults, actually. I've got them to raise their hand or stand up. So each group has a word or 3 or 4 words, and when they hear it, they have to stand up. And sometimes it's repeated a lot in the song, so they end up standing up a lot. But you're right, you've got to know your learners, haven't you? Know if they do that or not.
Yeah, with some learners, that would definitely work. But I think my main tip is just make sure you play the song many times, so then the lyrics get into their head, they hear them more, because repetition always helps. But just make sure that you change the activity slightly every time. So with very young learners, I listen the first time, hold up a flashcard, for example. Second time, do actions.
Mm-hmm.
Third time, circle a word you hear, for example.
Nice.
So
and before you know it, they'll be singing along. This is what I find.
Yeah.
Or dancing. All right, should we take another question? Because we've got a lot, so let's take some more. We've got one from Lara. What activities can we do with our learners that will reduce them forgetting the material they studied earlier? think we had something similar, didn't we, on the Facebook Live, talking about reviewing material. So, I mean, I'll just give a quick opinion on this and then I'll let you jump in with your ideas. But just thinking to what Suzanne has said there is repeating. So not thinking that, okay, I've done this vocabulary now, or I've done this grammar now I can move on to something else. Is that you know, we need a lot of repetition and using language in different ways, in different situations, in writing and in speaking, before it really goes in, before it moves from just something that we understand to something that we can produce. And I think we can all relate to this, can't we, when we're learning a language, and a foreign language, and you're listening and you can go, yeah, I understand, I just can't say it. So it's making sure that that language kind of moves into that productive vocabulary. So that would be my thing, is practice it in different ways, but also help students to notice it as well in listening and reading. You know, is there anything, do you notice anything here we looked at last week? Or okay, we looked at this verb tense last week. Can you see any examples in the reading text, and doing those kinds of activities to raise awareness? That's me. What can you add to that, either of you?
Okay, I agree with a lot of what Claire has said there. And I think you could also dedicate, for example, 10 minutes of every lesson to reviewing language that they've done before. So just to help with that repetition. And I think it's also worth thinking about what they've done, or looking through what they've done and thinking how you can review it. So for example, if you've done countable with your learners and maybe you used a restaurant dialogue to help with countables, so then if you've maybe been doing some other kind of vocabulary with your learners, can you use that with countables? So have a look where you can fit in vocabulary and grammar activities that you've done and make it into something new. And I think making sure that learners record vocabulary is quite important, and this could be a learner training activity, teaching them how to keep vocabulary and how to review vocabulary themselves. And as a teacher, make sure that you try and bring vocabulary that they've learnt before into any new activities that you're doing with them. So if you're producing any handouts, think, okay, what vocabulary have we done recently? What can I use here?
I think that's a really good idea, the recording, you know, whether it's they've got a little book. I remember having a French vocabulary book at school, or they record it on their phone. It's good to use that, isn't it, in class, to get them to, you know, kind of, they can test each other, or okay, we're going to have a 5-minute vocabulary review, get your books out, tell a story using 10 of the words or something like that. So nice idea there. Josh, anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the most important thing is probably links to learner training and what Susan's just said. So I think I've started to try to move away from saying, let's look at what we've learnt today, to saying, let's look at what we've started to learn today. Because I simply don't believe that we teach a lesson to these outcomes and that's learnt. I mean, that is just not the way that learning happens, in my opinion. You start a learning trajectory, you begin to learn something and you become more fluent and more able to use that vocabulary or language expression through more exposure, through trying it out. So it is all about not just repeating, but making deeper and more and wider our knowledge, and more accessible to the language that we're learning. And I think for learner training, I find, I've mentioned this lots of times, and I'm not kind of advertising for them. I think they do it for free anyway. There's a webpage called The Learning Scientists, where they have 6 strategies that are known through empirical research to support learning, really for exams and stuff. But I think it's extendable to any kind of learning, really, to do with repeating, spaced intervals, switching between subjects that you're studying, elaborating on what you're trying to learn, retrieval practice, which is trying to bring things back into your memory. So I think there needs to be a little bit of struggle to try and retrieve what you're trying to learn when you test yourself, when you practice, or when you review it. because that helps to kind of reinforce the connections. So quite often with higher level students or older students, what I would do is get them to discuss their own strategies for preparing for exams and review, and then get them to each take one of these 6 strategies and investigate it, try it out, present it, then take one from each group to present each of the strategies so that they all know these 6 strategies for learning things, for helping to memorize things, and then get them to work with that. And I think also it's worth pointing out that there are several apps and websites that will help with spaced retrieval practice and monitoring. You know, they're like flashcards. They test you on vocabulary lists that you put there, and you have multimedia vocabulary lists or whatever. And the ones that you get wrong, they test you more frequently on. The ones you get right, they test you less frequently on. And then they try and make sure that they prompt you to review this in spaced, increasingly distant spaces of time to try and strengthen the memory.
Have you got any things like Quizlet for that, Josh, or
for example, I think Quizlet does now have a spaced retrieval algorithm in it, but there are other ones that do as well. I think Anki and ones that lots of them. There are lots of them.
Gone are the days where we had to write it on little bits of paper, and you know, I remember I used to work with a teacher who was learning Russian, and he'd written lots of words in Russian on one side of the card and English on the back, and he had all the words in his jacket pocket in the left hand pocket, and when he was on the bus or whatever time there was, he would get out, try and test himself on the words, and when he knew them, they'd go into his right hand pocket. So anyway, we don't need to do that anymore, but that's my final low technology tip.
I think that's a good thing to do, but yeah, it doesn't have to be technology.
It worked for him.
Yeah.
He went to Russia successfully. Okay, let's take another question. This is from Tatiana. Oh, there were lots of questions about this. How can we make grammar lessons not boring for the students?
Okay, I think it's about variety. So when you think about grammar lessons, think about how you do your grammar lessons. Do you always use the same format? Are you always presenting grammar to your learners? So I think if you always use the same format, then it's going to be boring. So I think when you present grammar, always try and think of a different way to present it. I think one book that really opened my eyes was the Anti-Grammar Grammar book, which is quite old now, but I think you can still get it. Because it had lots of ideas about inductive grammar. So this is when you give the grammar in a context, you don't present the grammar, and then through an activity you get the learners to tell you what the grammar rules are. So they're learning the grammar rules themselves, and it's a really good way of getting it into their memory. So I think that's very useful. And I think there's also a really good article on the Teaching English website by Michael Swan as well. So we can share that with you, where he talks about grammar. So just have a look at as many resources as you can if you can't get hold of that book. So there are lots of different things online, and look at inductive grammar and see what you can, inductive grammar teaching, see what you can find out. I think that's going to be a big help.
Brilliant. I'm just writing down all these websites to remind me to get a link so we can put them under the video afterwards. Josh?
Are you waiting for me to say
yes.
something? You are waiting. Okay.
Pearls of wisdom.
Well, I think we've had the words of wisdom. That was, you know, I'd noticed that Suze had put some links to inductive grammar teaching on the course, I think, for people who are asking how to make grammar teaching interesting. And I totally agree. It's always worked for me surprisingly well to challenge students to try and notice language that they're interested in and figure out for themselves the grammar, and then present it back to other groups if you do it. So I think another thing, the same as what Suze was saying, but also maybe not always to try and kind of do a lockstep, we're all going to do the same grammar points, and then particularly with kind of post-intermediate levels, there's often a very big variety of differences and gaps in their grammatical knowledge. So they may all be more or less the same level, but have different issues. And it seems much more sensible to get them to try to clear up their own issues. If you notice, when I can see you having trouble using this in a standard kind of way, maybe you can spend some time investigating what the right way to do, well, what the accepted norms are for this bit of language or whatever.
Yeah, I like that idea actually. I wonder, I was thinking about kind of incidental, we call it, don't we, incidental grammar teaching, but I think that's one of the most, it makes it sound less important, where actually it's one of the most important ways to teach grammar, I think, is noticing gaps and helping learners to realise that, and then helping them to fill those gaps. I was thinking about not calling grammar lessons, is talking about the topic, or you know, today we're going to learn about how to do this in English, or we're going to watch this video, and let the grammar come out. Again, like you were saying, Suze, you know, use your context. We've been talking about this on the course this week. And then, you know, the learners will be like, oh, what, hang on, that was grammar. You know, because sometimes I think if you go into the classroom going, right, we're going to do the present perfect today, you know, nobody's jumping for joy, are they, really, if you say that? So I think if you switch your mindset and let the grammar come from the language, and let it come from the students as well, work with what they are producing, or work with a video or a text and let it come from that. That would be my advice.
I think, just to pick up on what you just said, I think some people do jump for joy when you say we're going to do some grammar.
Okay, yes, some do, you're right.
And also, you just reminded me, I did something which they used to, sometimes they're called dictaglosses, sometimes they're called grammar dictations, but I think that can work well inductively as well. You can dictate something that contains some language, some grammatical aspects that you want people to practice and revise, but you dictate it at a speed that is too fast for it to be a dictation, and you ask them to listen, understand, and then in pairs try and reconstruct what you've said before showing them the text, and remind them, think about the grammatical correctness of this, because very often they'll write down something that pretty much means what you're saying, but there'll be errors in it, and actually they know a lot of the rules. They're just trying too hard to copy what you've said, so then they can reconstruct it. I think that works well. Or reconstruct it on the basis of trying to share their grammatical knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, should we do one more? I think we've got time for one more. Let's take one that's not about grammar. How about this one from Fatme? How should we start teaching English to those who have no knowledge about it?
Okay, I think when you've got absolute beginners, I think the first thing I would start off with is introductions, because what you want to start off with is something that you can convey meaning through gesture. And obviously, if you go up to somebody and you shake their hand, say, hello, I'm Suzanne, what's your name? Okay, I think it's quite an easy concept to portray, because it's something we do a lot in everyday life. If in your culture you don't shake hands, maybe you bow or do something different, then you can also use that gesture to get across the meaning to them. So I think using your body a lot, and I think starting off with introductions and then moving on to personal information. So I think talking about age, for example, that's also an easy concept for learners to understand, and teaching them numbers, and then how old are you is quite an easy concept to understand. So yeah, personal information, introductions. So try and use your body as much as possible. Try and do little role plays and dialogues, and that will really help them understand the language.
Josh?
I haven't taught absolute beginners for a long time, but I think that there's two things that I would say. One is I can remember it being really fascinating, and like the struggling with trying to understand something, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of struggle is great. It's really engaging, but also it can be very stressful and very tiring to be in an environment where you really are just kind of imagining what's being said. And also you need an environment where you feel free to make errors and try, and everyone is kind of happy. So I think it's very important to work on creating the right kind of atmosphere. And the other thing that was really useful for me, and still is really useful for me, is to try, as a teacher, learning a language that you don't know, particularly one that you're not familiar with, the script, in a classroom situation, and going through the experience of being an absolute beginner. Because like I say, for me anyway, I'm sure it must be different for different people, there's a mixture of fascination with trying to figure out what things are and how it works, nervousness about making a fool of yourself in front of everyone, and stress, and you know, needing time for a break and downtime, as well as kind of being on the spot, to a much greater extent than in an intermediate or advanced class, where you can kind of switch off for a while and come back and still be more or less with it, if you see what I mean.
Whereas it's tiring. It's tiring.
Yeah, yeah.
Language when you're so new at it and it's so different.
I think it requires a lot of attention when it's completely unfamiliar, and you can't keep that up. Well, I can't. Maybe it's because I'm getting old. I don't know.
And
How
you
is it for
revealed
you?
your age in today's video, I noticed. That's a first. I'm just going to add something to what you said, Suze. I was thinking about how we get meaning across, and I was thinking in some course books they focus a lot on words, don't they? And I don't think that's the way to go to start with. I agree with you. I think we just start with phrases and functions and helping learners to talk about themselves right from the beginning. You know, we don't want to start with apple, orange, banana. We want to start with, hello, how are you? My name's, how old are you? I like apples, oranges, bananas, football. Oh, right, do you? Yeah, me too. That kind of thing. And I think we can start with those phrases. And like you say, gestures, demonstrations, pictures to get meanings across, videos. Even if there's no sound on the video can give you the context and the situation, and then you can provide the very simple language to help learners from that. But also, I really agree with what you say, Josh. It's exhausting when you're a total beginner, particularly if the teacher doesn't speak your language, or if they're not speaking your language in class. So I think, you know, we need to make sure we give downtime as well. All right, we're going to stop there before we get cut off. So thanks I've enjoyed our conversation today. It's been nice talking about some of these things. As I say, there are lots more questions we haven't got to, so please do give your advice and opinions as you look through the comments below, and do check out some of the links that we'll be posting as well, to give a bit more information about the topics that we discussed today. All right, thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.